I'm interested in helping people empower all areas of their life. Because if we don't empower ourselves intellectually, we'll be told what to think. If we don't empower ourselves in business, we'll be told what to do. If we don't empower ourselves in finance, we'll be told what we're worth. If we don't empower ourselves in our relationship, we'll be doing honeydews. If we don't empower ourselves socially, we'll be told misinformation and propaganda. If we don't empower ourselves physically, we'll be told what drugs to take and what organs to remove. If we don't empower ourselves spiritually, we'll be told some dogma that's antiquated. We have to empower ourselves, and that requires education and quality questions.
Hey, welcome to another one. This is Unlatched Mind. My guest today is Dr. John Demartini. Dr. Demartini is a world-renowned specialist in human behavior. He's a researcher, an author. He travels the world, teaching people how to live a more inspired life. If that's probably the best way I can summarize, his work. There's a lot of motivational speakers out there, and inspirational personalities and whatnot. But Dr. Demartini is he's kind of unique. His perspective on things, at least it resonated with me in a unique way. I can't remember the last time I was kind of I got through a discussion and it was just so pumped. I dug into his material and was putting a list together of things I wanted to actually buy from his website. I know that sounds like hyperbole, but his perspective truly resonated with me, and I had a really great discussion. So, and I hope it resonates with you as well. So with that, I give you Dr. John Demartini. Dr. Demartini, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I really, I had seen an interview that you had done. Motivation doesn't work. It absolutely resonated with me. It really did. I'm not just blowing sunshine up your butt here. I mean, it was timely. And, initially I saw it. I saw some of the buzzwords around that. That doesn't seem very unique. I'm okay with a lot of inspirational speakers out there, and but then I started really digging into your work, and honestly, you do have a very interesting perspective. I feel like it's unique, and anyway, it really resonated with me, so I'm excited to dig into it. But before we do, could a little background on yourself, who you are, how you got to where you are. I think you have an interesting life story, and I think that sets a nice little context, if you will.
You want the 1 second version?
Whatever you feel is the right level to get people to know you a little bit.
I had learning challenges as a child.
Hmm.
I ended up being a high school dropout, or junior high school dropout. Hit the streets when I was 13. Lived kind of a street kid, beach kid. Hitchhiked out to California when I was 14 from Texas, and down into Mexico to go surfing because Texas wasn't a surf capital. Made it to Hawaii at 15. Lived under a bridge initially, then to a park bench, then a bathroom, then an abandoned car, and then finally a tent. Kept social climbing. And then nearly died at 17. And I met an amazing teacher as a result of that, named Paul Bragg, who inspired me one night at a presentation to believe that maybe I could overcome my learning problems and someday become intelligent. I never thought I was going to be intelligent. I thought I'd be a surfer. Not that surfers aren't intelligent. They have a different physical intelligence and psychological strategy intelligence, but not academic intelligence necessarily. They might, but not necessarily.
Right.
And I went on a pursuit after that, after meeting him, to overcome my learning problems, to learn how to read. I really didn't read a book from cover to cover till I was 18. And with the help of my mom and a dictionary, I started memorizing 30 words a day until my vocabulary was strong enough to where I was able to go back to school. I took a GED, high school equivalency test, and slowly inched my way back into school and eventually started excelling. And then once I really got masterful at the reading process, I never stopped. I started gathering people asking me questions, students. And here I am 48 and a half years later. I've had the opportunity to speak in 154 countries and reach billions of people. So I just never gave up on a dream to overcome my learning problems, learn and try to share with the night I met Paul Bragg, I got a vision to want to be a teacher, and so I've been wanting to teach ever since. So
Hmm.
that's what I do
Neat.
today. Well, every day is I
Yeah.
research, write, and teach.
Hmm. Yeah. No, you're obviously inspired, and it's I feel like that hardship you went through certainly sharpened the sword, if you will. A lot of folks need that, and you leveraged it for
Well,
good. So
I look back
that's
at it
incredible.
now, and I'm thankful. If I hadn't had those
Yeah.
exact components, I wouldn't be where I am. So I always say anything you can't say thank you for is baggage. Anything you can say thank you for is
Right.
fuel.
Yeah.
It's all on the way, not in the way.
Mm.
So I never look back with regret. I look
Yeah.
back
Yeah.
with thankfulness.
Mm. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, great story. No, I appreciate that. And that's like I saw I had seen your backstory, and I thought it'd be a great. I just needed to open up with that. I think folks need to hear that. It's always good to have an idea of where like we start digging into the conversation. Like, who's this person? Where do they come from? Were their parents billionaires? They just have all these ideas in their head. So it's kind of good to just lay ground truth to kick it off. But so like I was saying earlier, you're I really the motivation doesn't work. You had a bunch of talks and interviews around that topic. I'm sure you have blogs and stuff. I consumed as much as I could before this, but at face value, I'm thinking, well, of course it does. What is he talking about? And that's right. And then I dug into it, and obviously you explain it pretty well. So explain what you mean by that. Give us that initial summary, and then we'll kind of dissect it a little bit. I think it's a pretty unique perspective you have there.
Well, I've been a neurology student, taught neurology in my 20s, and brain researcher, and psychology research, and philosophy researcher, in many different fields. And every human being lives by a set of priorities, a set of values, things that are most to least important in their life. And although this set of values evolves through time, at any one moment, you have a set of
Mm-hmm.
priorities. Whatever's highest on that list of values, you are spontaneously inspired intrinsically to act upon and fulfill. Just like a young boy who loves his video games, nobody has to remind him to get up and do his video games. And whatever it is that we require no extrinsic motivation, incentives, or reminding to do is an intrinsic drive. And that is where we excel. That is where we are intrinsically driven
Mm-hmm.
to do things. We're inspired. But as we go down the list of values in priority, the lower they go, the more we procrastinate, hesitate, and frustrate. Instead of being disciplined, reliable, and focused, we procrastinate, hesitate, and frustrate. And we require extrinsic motivation, incentive, and reminding to get us to do things. We'll need a reward if we do it or a punishment if we don't do it in order to get us to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And transient external motivations are symptoms of a disengaged individual, not a solution, it's a symptom. When people go to work, they go to work not for the sake of a company. They go to work to fulfill what is most intrinsically meaningful and fulfilling to them, whatever they value most in life. Could be their family, could be getting ahead, could be finances, whatever it may be. If they can perceive that the job duties that they're doing every day are helping them fulfill what they value most, they'll be engaged. You won't need to motivate them. You have the right person on the bus, as Jim Collins says. But if they can't see how that job duty is helping them fulfill what their value is, you're going to need to micromanage them and motivate them. And so I say that motivation is a
Right.
symptom, never a solution for humanity. So I'm not interested in transient. Now, why I say transient is because when you're living by your highest values, you tend to persevere. You tend to have longer space and time horizons. You tend to be patient. You tend to not stop until you get your aim. You walk your talk. But in your lower values, you tend to shrink your space and time horizon. You want immediate gratification.
Yeah.
When you're living by your highest values, your blood glucose and oxygen goes into the forebrain, into the medial prefrontal
Mm.
cortex, which is the gratitude center and the strategic planning center, the visionary center. Even though the visual cortex is in the occipital areas, there's fibers that go from the medial prefrontal cortex to the visual 5E6 associative areas of the occiput. And so they literally allow you to see the vision. Those are the vision
Mm.
first. Those without a vision perish, as the old proverb say. So whenever you're living in your highest values, your forebrain and foresight is ruling. And whenever you're not, and you're living in lower values, you progressively put the blood glucose and oxygen into the amygdala and hindbrain, where you're dealing with reactions and learning from trial and error, which is the lowest heuristic. So by taking the time to prioritize your life and fill your day with high priority actions that inspire you, your day doesn't fill up with low priority distractions that don't. And in order to overcome those distractions, you need motivation. So I am not interested in having to motivate people. I'm not interested in finding out what they say is important, but never get around to doing.
Mm.
I'm interested in finding out what they intrinsically feel inspired and called to do that nothing stops them from. That's where they're going to excel. That's where they're going to wake up their genius and creativity and contribution. And that's unique, and that's where they're going to make the greatest difference in the world. So the hierarchy of one's values dictates one's destiny.
Mm.
And lower value living devalues you, and higher value living values you.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to argue with any of those points, really. I mean, I think the hard part is this is not the default that society gives us, right? And we come from if you look at these revolutions we've gone through, agricultural, technological, we are, we seek monetary reward, right? And folks want to support their family, they want to, so they may be well into this life of doing exactly the opposite of what you just said, right? So we are, many of us, myself included, a lot of times I find my work inspiring some days, other days you don't. You have to find that balance sometimes. But so if someone's listening and they say, well, that's great, but and if I jump down, I think you had said at one point, the quote was exactly safety, I think you said, or security is one of the biggest blockers to folks living their most inspired life, and that's a reality. Folks have to pay the bills, they have children, they have dependents. So if someone's listening and they want to get to that point, now if someone's, I think, starting and they're 16 years old, 17, they're not even started college yet, they get this message, I think that's amazing, because they'll start with that, or even younger, if you will, they'll start with that foundation and always pursue, they'll pursue life. They'll enter the gate, if you will, with that in mind. And I think the rest will take care of itself. I truly believe that. What do you say to that 30, 40, 50-year-old person that's got a lot of, security is important for them. There's folks depending on them. How can they make that transition, to I think you called it the I got to or I have to versus I want to. You know what I mean?
Well, in thousands of years ago, during nomadic times, we didn't survive on our own very easily. So we joined into kinships and families. And then we went into tribes. And then we went into townships and eventually communities and cities. And then states and nations, now globally. And someday solar. And that was a survival strategy because specialization, everybody had a different specialty and they could contribute most efficiently. And so therefore economic markets emerged in order to have fair exchange between different specialties. But you became dependent on other people to some degree by that mechanism. So banishment from the group and not fitting in and not abiding by the mass herd instincts and impulses frighten people. It's built in. It's epigenetically coded multi-generationally. But everybody also has a desire to make a difference. And you'll never make a difference fitting in and conforming. Ernest Becker, in his Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Denial of Death, said, because of the fear of death, we associate with either collective heroism or individual heroism. And collective heroism is fitting in, and individual heroism is standing out. And 1% or less stand out. The rest of them fit in. And you stop and think about it. The majority of people are not Nobel Prize winners. The majority of people are not Olympic medalists. The majority of people aren't the wealthiest. The majority of people are not academics, or they're leaders of business, or spiritual leaders, or political leaders, or family dynasties. It's the few, the individual heroes that stood and made those differences. They were unborrowed visionaries that stood on the shoulders of others instead of in their shadows. Now, why do most people do that? Very simple. It's survival and safety, security. And I'd like to give if you don't mind, a step-by-step process that can help anybody, no matter where they are, if they decide to move towards an individual hero and make a difference in the world. This step can help.
Yeah,
So if
let's do it.
I could outline that,
Absolutely.
that would be useful. I was 27 years old. I just opened up a practice. I had one assistant, and I was doing everything, generalizing. And I felt like I was gone to 10 years, nearly 10 years of college for a specialty, but here I was doing paperwork and supplies and administrative stuff.
Right.
And I realized that this is not because I have to. This is because I'm not using my resources effectively. There's no have-tos out there. If you choose to do something, that's your choice, but you can justify and blame people, but you'll never empower your life blaming other outside circumstances. We have control over our perception, decisions, and actions. So if we blame outside circumstances, it's our foolishness. If we go and say, okay, these are the circumstances, now how do I use these resourcefully and how do I use them to my greatest advantage to fulfill my mission? There's always a way. So your perceptions, you have control over it. You can change your perceptions to see things on the way or in the way. It's up to you. You can be master of destiny or victim of history. But I decided to go to a bookstore and educate myself. And I found a book called The Time Trap by Alec McKinsey, because most people were trapped. I was trapped. So I said, okay, what's the education to get out of this trap? I found this book. And after reading and dog-earing the book and circulating things, or circling things, underlying things, I did a summary of one of the principles in the book. So if everybody's listening, whoever you are, no matter where you are, whether you're a mother at home with children or businessman or a businesswoman, get out a piece of paper and put 5 vertical lines from top to bottom, 6 equal space columns across the page. 5 vertical lines, 6 equal spaces. In the first column, I want to have you write down every single thing you do in a day. And I don't mean vague, broad generalities. I mean specific actions you do moment by moment throughout the day. Don't put marketing. Put the actual steps you're doing while you're doing marketing. Don't do administrative. Put the actual action steps you're doing. Every action step you do in a day, put it down there. And take a day that might occur over a 3-month period. So anything you might do over a 3-month period per day, put it in there. Not just one day, but anything you might do over a 3-month period, put it in that list. Because this is an honest, objective evaluation of what you actually do with your day. Because it's easy to blame the world around you for your own lack of priority in your own day. But you're never going to empower your life looking outside. As Epictetus once said, those on the early phase of their journey of mastery blame others. Then they blame themselves. And then they realize there's nothing to blame. There's just an experience that you can use to your advantage or disadvantage. After you make this list and divide it up into personal and professional, to the right of that, the second column, write down how much does it produce per hour? How much income does it generate? The income that it generates means that you care enough about humanity to somehow fill some other human being's needs, enough for them to compensate you sustainably. So if you're not serving anybody, you're going to be trapped all your life. The universe rewards people that contribute to other people's lives. So if you're not generating income by what you're doing, that means you're focused narcissistically on your own life instead of actually contributing to other people. And of course, if you expect to get ahead that way and not get out of the trap, you're not likely to, because you'll be living with more money or more year at the end of your money than money at the end of your year. So you write down, what does it produce per hour? If you spend an hour on it, you write down what it is per hour that it generates. A half hour on it, multiply it times 2. If 2 hours on it, divide by 1. You will discover as you do this that a great percentage of the things you do don't generate income. And every time you do something that's not generating income, you're devaluing your time. And when you devalue your time, so does the world. So you write down everything that you do. and put an honest dollar value. And don't exaggerate, don't minimize it. Get as honest extrapolation as you possibly can. And inside doing that, you'll have insights about why you're in your position. You have nowhere to look but within. And there's nothing to blame. It's just a realization. Because you can change that today and your life changes. So first do that. When I did that, I discovered that the thing I went to school for wasn't the highest, most productive thing I could be doing. Me going out and doing a presentation to an audience and generating new clients was more productive per hour than me actually being clinically in a little cubicle with a patient. And that was eye-opening, because here I was going all those years to college to go and do a specialty without even thinking, is this the most efficient use of my time? Mm-hmm. But it was very important to be able to do a little of both. In the third column, and by the way, when you finish that, then prioritize it. What produces the most per hour down to least per hour? And be honest. Being honest with yourself helps, liberates you. The third column is, how much meaning does it have? On a 1 to 10 scale, 10 being extremely inspiring, spontaneously invigorating, you can't wait to do it, you can't get it out of your mind, you love doing it, that's a 10. And a 1 or less is something you feel you've got to do, have to do, must. You hear the imperative language, I should, I ought to, I'm supposed to, I got to, I have to, I must. It's something that is a deontological duty from an outside source that you don't really intrinsically want to do, but you need motivation to keep reminding you to do. Anytime you need motivation, you're draining your energy. That's why you need motivation. That's why motivation is never a solution, it's a symptom. But go through there and make a list on a 1 to 10 scale, and it will blow your mind on how much you're doing that's not meaningful, not inspiring to you, that you feel is duty. And that's because you're subordinating to outside authorities. Kohlberg said individual authorities, mamas, papas, preachers, teachers, small groups of community, city, state, nation, or world mores, traditions, conventions that you've subordinated to. You've never questioned them. You just are just following them without thinking, without you're parroting, being told what to do without ever even questioning it. You got to give yourself permission to go beyond that in life. If otherwise, you're going to be one of the statistics, I promise you. After you've made that list, you're going to see, if you prioritize that list in meaning, that some of the things that are extremely meaningful will also be things that are more productive. And so what you may want to do is to combine those and look at what is the most meaningful and the most productive. Because that's where you and your customer are going to be most fulfilled. Where you can't wait to get up in the morning and tap dance to work, and they can't wait to get the service. That's where you have the least amount of resistance in building the most amount of business. The fourth column is how much will it cost to hire somebody to do those actions to the same standard as I would do it. We have our delusion sometimes that, well, by the time I trained somebody doing it, I could have done it. Well, they can't ever do it as well as I can. As long as you have this proud, exaggerated perception of yourself, you're going to be trapped, because you will never be able to let go and get on with the highest priority things unless you delegate. Without delegation, you can never have anything but the trap. And people who are not serving people will not have the income to delegate. So the universe rewards people that serve people in a sustainable, fair way with equity, and delegate, and delegation gives job opportunities and helps the economy. Both grow the economy. And that's just a basic principle of economics. By doing that, and by hiring people that are inspired to do what you want to delegate, and that is in taking in all the costs, not just their salaries, their space utilization, their depreciative of equipment, their hiring, their training, their parking, every lost opportunity cost, every single thing that they do, training cost, find out what that cost is, and then look at where the biggest spread is in column 2 to column 4, between what produces the most and what actually costs the least. That lets you know where your greatest spread is, where if you delegated, you make the most surplus labor value out of capital, human capital. Once you've got that list, you go to the next one, and that is, how much time do you actually spend on it per day? Averaging in those 3 months, what's the actual time you spend a day on this? And after that's listed, you now have the data to be able to, in the last column, which is the final prioritization, factoring in all the variables, the spread, the productivity, the cost, and the meaning. And if you put all that, the productivity, all of those things together, you summarize that into the greatest assessment as you possibly can, being honest with yourself about what would be the highest priority thing that I can be doing that inspires me, that serves the most people, and to give way to hiring people to delegate. Because if you do not delegate, there's no way you can do the highest priority things. You're going to be trapped. And those trappings have nothing to do with anybody outside you. It's your fear of rejection from them. It's your fear of their opinions. See, everybody has a set of values, and they're going to project their values onto you. And if you perceive them more important than you, and you think their values are more important than you, you're going to subordinate to those values, inculcate those values, and cloud the clarity of your own dream, and won't live by priority. And this is where people get trapped. They're worrying about what people think instead of going out and doing what's wise. We're not here to compare ourselves to others. We're here to compare our daily actions to our highest values and how fulfilled we can be. And then we can exemplify and demonstrate an exemplification of an empowered and masterful life. And other people will first ridicule us because we're not fitting into their box, but eventually they'll honor us because they realize that you've just mastered your life. So if you do that exercise, regardless you're of a housewife at home, because if the mother's doing things that are low value and $10 and $20 an hour jobs when she's capable of earning $500 an hour as a specialist, she's foolish to keep doing low priority things and devaluing herself and showing her kids how to live a devalued life, instead of allowing herself Ricardo's advantage, comparative and competitive advantage of hiring people that are most efficient so you can liberate yourself to do the 20% that gives you 80% of results in life. So this principle is solid. I've taken it to governments, I've taken it to corporations, I put it into households, into schools, and I mean, it's being used all over the place. And it's such a simple, basic, common sense strategy to transform your lives. So it doesn't matter where you've been or what you're going through. What matters is, are you going to do the things that have proven to work? If you do, your life changes. And there's no excuses, and you don't need motivation. If you truly, see, many people bitch about their situation, but the bitching about their situation, if it continues, it means that the amount of benefits they're getting, staying stuck, are still more advantageous than the drawbacks. So I don't pay attention to what people bitch about. I pay attention to what they live. Their actions speak louder than their words. And what people say about how their life's so terrible and everything else, if it was that terrible, they would change it. And they just need the education on how to strategize it to do it. And that tool, I assure you, can help.
No, and that those 5 columns are now the book was The Time Trap. Is that where that column example came from?
Yeah, this was the version that I had was a 1982 version. There's an updated version, but I like the other two. I like the 1981. But either way,
no,
great little book.
It's a brilliant way to walk through, where you're at and why you're there and how could you get to where you want to go. Like if I just in a layman's term, just kind of, because I had a lot of questions for you and you kind of articulated a lot of the answers with that example, that 5-column example. So, now, I imagine that example, as you're going through it, I'm thinking, playing with your children in the backyard generates no income, but it's extremely high value. So as you're walking through it, I was like, well, it doesn't account for this. But I say, but wait, it actually does account for all those things, because those things can be evaluated. I think maybe it was column 2 and 3 where you have zero income generated on it, but also super high value. Did I interpret that right? Would that be how those columns would
meaning? You compensate by meaning, but I'm not certain that you don't make money playing with your kids. You have to be really honest with yourself. Sometimes playing with your kids clears your consciousness to be freed to focus. And sometimes not. Creates a lot of entropy, which costs. So you got to be creative in what those values are. Let me give another example, though. You got to realize the lower the socioeconomics, the more the parents spend time with the kids and do the kids follow in the footsteps of the parents and follow the trade. It's a trades pathway. I'll just give you a story that'll shock people. This will probably be off the charts for some people. I live on a ship, as you may know, and it's called the World. I've been living on there for 20 years. When I first moved on there 20 years ago, there was a lovely lady there that was affluent, and her husband that had a 16-year-old daughter. The 16-year-old daughter, they got 2 apartments on the ship is a condominium ship. It's a private condominium ship. And so the parents bought 2 condominiums for the daughter, one to live in and one to pay for and to house her teachers, kind of like a homeschooling thing. So the parents bought 6 weeks to 3-month periods from Nobel Prize winners. They hired Nobel Prize winners to say, we'd like to hire you to train our daughter. And they'd pay them handsome fee to come and stay on the ship and sail around the world, training their daughter throughout the day. Now, I spent many hours with her and these Nobel Prize winners, and I was astonished at what she was learning. Now, her parents didn't see her every day, but she was getting an education that they couldn't provide. So we sometimes have this fantasy, but I'd like to just throw this up in the air, and I know this is going to offend some people that aren't thinking the bigger picture. When you're born and the baby comes up onto your breast, imagine if it had the capacity to speak. And it turned to you and said, so what are your credentials? What are your credentials?
Right.
And we sometimes assume, and this is just an assumption, this is no basis in anything other than an assumption, that we're the best parent. And we are, biologically, probably have the most affection for the child and bloodline connection, etc. But we have to ask, for the long run, for the evolution of this child, is it only us part of the time, and specialists helping? What is really the greatest thing for the child? And this is an interesting paradox, because I've traveled to 154 countries and seen all kind of cultural belief systems, and whatever cultural belief system that you're raised, you assume is it. But there are many.
Yep.
And I've seen it sometimes in the Sikh culture, Guru Nanak's derivative, they send their children off, sometimes at age 4, off to specialized training, and then they come back at age 18. And they're very respectful, and I've met many of them, and they're highly respectful, love their parents, but they're very well trained by very quality specialists. And when I saw that, I was going, there's all kind of belief systems out there, and everybody has a belief system. I'm not interested in a belief system that's handed down because it's just been handed down by culture and tradition. I'm interested in the outcome. What's the greatest result for this child? And sometimes it's you giving absolute affection and attention, and sometimes it's you delegating and setting aside and stepping aside and letting somebody who's more qualified to give them education. And a combination of both is probably the wisest. So her parents would come and visit her, and she would sometimes go visit them. But she had the greatest education. Now, by the time she was in her 20s, she already had companies, was socially active, was already wealthy, was already developing things, innovating things, and believing in herself on levels that most people will never get to experience. So when I saw that, I thought, okay, we have to be aware of our belief systems. We don't even question them sometimes. We just assume, well, that's the way we've been raised, so that's how it's to be done. Or that's how our culture does it, and that's how it's to be done.
Yep.
But I want to give people the permission to step out of the box for a minute and stop and be an objective evaluation of really what's the wisest. Even psychologists that do so-called objective research sometimes put subjective biases of their own traditions into the research to justify their position. I've seen enough of this, even with functional MRI studies. Research doesn't mean it's really objective. It's just sometimes subjectively biased information. And then a dialectic of opposite views come in to counterbalance it. But I'm a firm believer that your heart and what inspires you and exemplifying that has an impact on the child. If you're not living authentically and you're subordinating and you're feeling trapped and you're showing them that how to run a life that's uninspiring, they're going to pick it up and assume that's the way it is. I've met them in townships in Africa
100%.
where they don't even believe it's possible to get out of that township because they've been raised that way. So give yourself permission to step out of the box. That's the wise thing to do. And that little tool I give you, that 6-step tool, is a stepping stone. There's many others. I could go for many of them, but that's just one beginning stepping stone to not be trapped. And just know that if you blame anything on the outside, you're not going to empower your life. Not about blame.
Yeah.
It's about taking whatever's happening in your life in the current reality. I watched people last year blame blame COVID, or blame the government, or blame China, or blame. The question you want to do is not compare your
Yeah.
current reality to a fantasy of how it used to be or how you hope it will be. The question is
Yeah.
what is exactly going on right now, and how do I use this to my greatest advantage to serve the greatest number of people and fulfill my inspired mission? And if you ask that question, the quality of your life is based on the quality of the questions you ask. And if you ask that question, you'll become resourceful. And then you'll use whatever happens resiliently and adaptively to do something stressful instead of distressful, and use your forebrain and solve problems, and then exemplify what's possible and become fortunate.
So how do you adjudicate this general theme with there is a utility. Well, I'll propose this. There's utility in doing something you don't want to do for the betterment of others, but maybe it's temporarily. I mean, how do you adjudicate that? With, like, say, okay, discipline. You got to just get through this. Is it okay in small doses to get to the? There's always going to be things we just don't want to do and just have to
No,
have that extra cup of
no,
coffee to get
no,
through,
no,
right?
no, no, no.
No.
False construct.
Hmm.
No, absolutely not. I've been teaching a program
Okay.
called the Breakthrough Experience for 32 years. I've taught it 1,123 times, 66 countries. I've never seen anything that to have to stay a have to. It's a perception. So here's two things that I hope everybody writes down. You have two ways of transforming your life.
I'm
Either
gonna
go
write them
do what
down
you
so that you
love
can
through
see me.
delegating. Either go do what you love through delegating, or love
Mm-hmm.
what you do through linking. I'm going to say it again. Either go do what you love through delegating, or go love what you do through linking. There's absolutely no reason to ever be trapped having to do anything. Having to do something is a result of not going and doing what's inspiring to you and delegating it, or not perceiving that action in a way that's helping you fulfill what's most meaningful to you. So you change the perception of it from a have
Yeah.
to something you love to. So you have two things you can change here. You can change your actions to priority, or you can change your perceptions to priority. But if you're not living by priority, you're going to self-depreciate. So there's no have tos in the world out there. There's no ontological or deontological duties that have to be done. Viktor Frankl in the concentration camps had a different attitude than the rest. He found meaning in the things that other people thought were torture. And as a result of it, he survived. They didn't. I have people that come to me every weekend in the Breakthrough Experience, and they have unbelievable stories of things that have happened to them. And they say, I feel trapped. I had no choice but to do this and that. No. And then I have them go in and take that same experience and ask, how is that experience helping you fulfill what you love, what you would really love to do in life? And they go, it's not. I said, I didn't ask how it isn't. I asked you to be accountable, to look and use your brain to create a link in your brain neuroplastically to find out how it's serving you. And in every case, if they will not run out of the room, they can find it. And then they learn how to be resourceful. The ratio of perceptions determine whether it's an imperative or indicative. So if you have a ratio of perceptions that you see way more drawbacks and benefits out of doing something, and yet you feel you're forced to do it, you're going to say, I got to do it. I have to do it. But once you see the advantages and ask where are the advantages of doing this, it becomes a choice. The same action, the very same action that you think you're forced to do is now something you're doing. So that way, nobody's forcing you to do anything. You're doing it because you understand how it's serving you. I take people in jobs that are unfulfilled in their jobs, and I can find out they can't see how their job duties are helping them fulfill what's meaningful. So I ask them, so how is this job duty helping you do what's meaningful? They go, it's not. I said, how is it? I don't see it. Look again. How is it? Every single case. I've talked about hundreds of thousands of cases. We've shown how it is, how it's on the way, by using your brain and making new links and associations. You can take any condition and create a new condition reflex with associations in the brain. That's what's the power of the human brain. We can make we can make a hell out of a heaven or a heaven out of a hell.
Yeah.
Socrates talked about that with Plato's writings. Hegel talked about that. All the way through the ages, this has been known. Anaxagoras talked about that in the association. I can make a pain out of a pleasure or a pleasure out of pain 2,600 years ago. So it is not what's happening to you, it's your perception of it. If you ask how specifically is this action going to help me? So let's say you have a job, I got to take the trash out. How is doing that, taking that trash out, helping you fulfill the mission? Okay, well, it's making me use my muscles, so I'm getting a little exercise program. Great. When I'm going outside, I'm waving to the neighbors, so it's a social contribution. Great. What else? I could turn it into a Tai Chi and use it as an exercise for tone. What else? I could be using to recite my little affirmations for the day, starting my day with statements as I'm doing and picking up the trash. How else?
Mm-hmm.
I'm showing my kids how to discipline themselves to do things that are clean environment. I mean, I could go on and find the blessings of this one action and turn it into something that can be inspiring simply by doing that. But I always say only link what you do to what you love until you can delegate it, but then free it up once you can delegate it. So either go do what you love through delegation or love what you do through linking. Those are two very powerful ways of prioritizing perceptions and actions. So it's not that we have to do anything. It's what we do with our perceptions.
It's pretty awesome, man. I'm telling you that was good. I love that because you're right. Perception. I mean, you hear it all the time, but it's never I've never heard it broken down like that. You hear, oh, it's just you can't control what comes at you. You control your response to it. There's all variations of it, right? But that you're right. So yeah,
But
it's fantastic.
I
Yeah,
research, I write, and I teach. That's it. I haven't cooked since I was 24. I haven't driven a car in almost 32 years. I don't have administrative things to do. And people say, well, you're lucky because you're wealthy or this and that. No, I became wealthy because I did that. They've got it backwards.
right.
I learned how to function masterfully, and I started applying it. And then the fruits of the labor showed. I just try to teach people how to do that. And the ones that do it, they get the same results. It has nothing to do with me.
Now,
So it
unfortunately,
doesn't matter where you are. I've taught kids, I've taught 14-year-old kids that live in townships how to do this and change their lives. It doesn't matter how it starts.
yeah. Now, unfortunately, at least in our country, we have a school system, right? It's very rigid. It starts when you're, kindergarten all the way up, and it's, I mean, if I remember right, I remember reading that the school system is basically preparing you for factory work, right? I mean, that's the legacy of what our school system is structured on. Now, things are changing a little slowly with technology and all, but this is not, someone not, by default, they may not ever, hopefully we're spreading the word and they'll find folks like you and others, but that's not the default of the educational system. So we're creating a lot of humans that have to go out of their way to find this podcast, to find your teachings, to find your programs. That seems very unfortunate in my opinion. Like the default is go to school, go to class, come back, do your homework, learn to do the things, and there's a lot of utility in that. But what you're defining is very much outside that box, or somewhat outside that box. There's some overlaps there, but
Yes. I just got asked, I just was on a conference, educational conference for the future, was it yesterday? Yesterday, I guess. Yesterday or the day before. And they asked me what are action steps for the future of education. And I've had the opportunity to go into many schools, from universities down to little elementary schools, and bring some of my ideas to the education. The kids, the Rockefellers formulated a Board of Education kind of contribution way back, literally 100 years ago. And they had no intention of creating scholars, leaders of business, leaders of government, great artists, great musicians. They wanted, like you said, drones to work in the factories.
yep,
We were going into the industrial age at the time. And so the educational system was not meant for creating independent thinkers. I mean, where once is there a class on how to be a millionaire and how to be an entrepreneur in elementary school?
right,
But I tell you what,
right,
there's kids now doing it, aren't there? There's millionaires in elementary
absolutely.
school today. So nobody's, I know a kid, I worked with a kid who was 14 years old that helped develop Mario and Luigi. games.
Oh,
Nintendo. His father ran Nintendo, owned Nintendo. And
mm,
he had $8 million. He was 14 years old. He had earned $8 million in royalties already. He knew how to hack any computer, and he knew how to go right into the educational system and change his grades right on the spot. That's how computer savvy he was. And his goal was to do something in Hollywood, big in Hollywood. He was 8 years old, and his mother was afraid he wasn't going to finish high school, or his little school that he was going to. And he just
yeah.
was way ahead of his mom. And so we sometimes want to put a box around people, but I think it's disrespectful. I think giving right and wrong answers, which is a moral hypocrisy, setting them up for conflict in their future, unless it's something like a math question, they need to be able to express themselves. Not a here's what the answer is, kind of
Mm,
right wrong thing. Sometimes that's applicable in some topics, but not all topics.
yeah.
I had a teacher named Marilyn Wilhelm that I got to lecture at her school. And she had 30 students, about 28 students in her class. And this lady was a genius. She memorized every structure of values that each of the children had, found out what was highest on their value, and memorized those and cared enough about those kids to know what was deeply meaningful to them.
Mm,
And
wow.
then she led the class by having each of them lead the class. The way that she did it, she says,
Mm,
Johnny, your dream is to run a car dealership. You know everything about cars. You're the most knowledgeable man in this classroom on cars. In 1954, what was the leading car sales? Well, he said like the Pontiac or something. And what was the color that was most common? Great. And at that moment, what was the second most powerful car sold? And Mary, you're headed to be a ballerina. Who's the leading ballerina in New York at the time at the Met? And each of these kids, and you, Johnny, you're planning on being a baseball star. Who is the number one batter at the time? And she took every one of those kids in their specialties and let them teach the class and inform them so they couldn't wait to go home and be prepared for that new information. And they all got to teach, and everybody got to listen and connect things as if it's a real world out there. Some of her kids, by the time
mm,
they were 13, were going to Rice University as professors. I watched it. It was amazing.
mm,
Never did she impose, this is what you're to be. She found out their gift and their genius inside and awakened it.
mm,
I believe that everybody has a genius inside. It's based on what they value most. They spontaneously want to learn about it. Find out what that is, and then link everything else that you think will help them in their education to that. And watch them emerge and absorb the information spontaneously, without coercion, without force. You can't
yeah.
force somebody to learn. In Seeds of Greatness, or The Secrets of Greatness, which is a documentary on some of the greatest sports leaders, they showed that the ones that were spontaneously wanting to do the sports and didn't have formal structure to it are the ones that excelled. They did it on their own because they were
Yeah.
inspired to do that sport. So finding out that intrinsic drive, extrinsic motivation squashes intrinsic drive. And substituting artificial rewards and punishments for things and gets people into a duty responsibility, sets them up for conformity. They're frightened of rejection
Mm.
from authorities. I'm a firm believer in helping people wake up their genius.
What do you think? You look at the state of affairs, society, culture, the country, USA. Where do you are you are you look? I mean, is it a good outlook? Are you disappointed where things are going? There is a lot of blame culture out there. It's someone else's fault for everything. I hear that a lot. I see that a lot. Now I don't know if that's social media, the BS that's out there. I don't know if that is true ground truth because that gets the headlines, but I feel like I see that more. I feel like every generation seems to get more and more. I don't know. Maybe that's just how do you see it? Where do you see the trends?
There's a law that's called the law of heuristic escalation. It's a principle in chaos theory,
Mm.
and it's shown to be a dominant principle of sociology. If you look carefully, when Donald Trump, for instance, wanted to put a wall up across Mexico and try to keep people out, the largest collection of people from Central America and Mexico tried to come across that wall. And now that they're letting them all in, now there's a movement to try to stop them from coming in. And the law of heuristic escalation says whenever an individual or group of people try to promote an ideal that's a subjective bias and not an objective fact, an equal and opposite subjective bias will counterbalance it. For every position, there's an opposition.
Mm.
And this entangled, like particle and antiparticle thinking, emerges on a collective scale in society. And so anytime we try to impose an idealism on society, the opposite ideal is going to occur. We see it right now in the Middle East. I was just online with the Middle East today because I'm working with the Middle East right now in conflict resolution.
Mm.
And what happens is you got an idealism. You have a group of people that have a particular belief system. If they are self-righteously thinking their belief system is right and not honoring another person's belief system, you can guarantee escalation of conflict. Guaranteed. Because we're here for equanimity and equity. Equity theory proves that. But what we do is we keep thinking that we're right. And being right creates opposition. So in the process of doing that, this law is being demonstrated. And during phases when we're under distress, we regress into more primitive amygdala responses that are survival responses. And that's what I'm seeing in society today. That doesn't mean that there's not a pair of opposites. There's people that are upset about what's happening, and there's new groups emerging trying to counterbalance it.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I see both of them and don't react to either of them, I stay centered. If I see one and bias my awareness to the other side, I react and join one side and then create the opposite side out of foolishness. So I don't see a worse or a better. I don't find that the moral constructs imposed on it is the answer. But to see the hidden order in the apparent chaos is what helps people transcend the chaos. But being part of the disorder and labeling and taking a side only creates an escalation of the opposite side.
Mm.
So I'm not interested in seeing it as bad. I think of it this way: if you have children, I don't know if you have children, but if you have children, you'll know that they're going to have times of peace and times of war, times of cooperation, times of competition, times of support and times of challenge, times of playing and times of conflicting. You're not going to stop that. That's part of the evolutionary process. Maximum development occurs at the border of support and challenge.
Mm.
But what we do is we end up getting into the fantasy, the moral hypocrisies of striving for that which is unobtainable and trying to avoid that which is unavoidable, which is a source of human conflict. And the Buddha warned against this in his middle path construct. But I'm a firm believer that futility is just there to teach us what doesn't work. And sometimes that's what we have to do. Like Thomas Edison had to go through 1,000 light bulbs that didn't work to get to the one that works.
Mm.
So it's a growth process. And sometimes we see our children fighting and we don't pay too much. We don't get too bent out of shape of it. We go, okay, that's just part of their growth process. Well, sometimes collective societies have to go through the same things. It's just a stage where they've regressed under stress. And COVID certainly has brought on some stress for some people.
Yeah.
So they're in their amygdala temporarily. It's not permanent.
Well, Dr. Demartini, so really enjoyed the conversation. Seriously. Now, we got a few more minutes left here. I want to respect your time. In closing, what you have a lot of content out there, have a lot of products out there. First of all, start with where can people find you? Where was the best place they could find you? Look up your material and read.
They can go on my website, drdemartini.com,
Okay.
and that's probably the easiest way to get access to information. And you can browse there. It's an educational website. You could probably spend the rest of your life on there and keep learning. There's literally thousands of
There's
things
lots
to
there.
be doing, videos, audios, YouTubes, you name it, because I put out a few a day.
Yeah.
And but there's also a value determination process to help you determine what you really value in life. That's complementary, that's private, that's free. I hope people will go to the website and take advantage of that. because it's an eye opener and it'll help you understand what's really important to you and to start structuring your life according to priority. So if that little exercise I gave initially, if people
Yeah.
are thirsty for that, go online and do the value determination. It's private. Do it again a week from now, a month from now, and every quarter.
Mm.
And take a look at what your life is really demonstrating as important to you. And watch out for what the shoulds and ought tos and all the society's expectations. Because if you can't get true with yourself, don't expect a fulfilled life. A quiet life of desperation is subordination. A life of
Mm.
inspiration is making a difference.
Mm. Yeah. That's an excellent closer. Fantastic. Yeah. And what, any one product specifically that targets a lot of our conversation today, or not really?
Well, there's a book that you can get on Amazon called The Values Factor that could be a good start for
Okay.
reading.
Okay.
Um, I think that was a basic one. I have a book out there also called Inspired Destiny. But on the website, there's just, if you just go through there and start looking at various topics, you'll find the topics that resonate with whatever you're resonating with at the time, what your needs are. And I'm interested in helping people empower all areas of their life. Because if we don't empower ourselves intellectually, we'll be told what to think. If we don't empower ourselves in business, we'll be told what to do. If we don't empower ourselves in finance, we'll be told what we're worth. If we don't empower ourselves in our relationship, we'll be doing honeydews. If we don't empower ourselves socially, we'll be told misinformation and propaganda. If we don't empower ourselves physically, we'll be told what drugs to take and what organs to remove. If we don't empower ourselves spiritually, we'll be told some dogma that's antiquated. We have to empower ourselves, and that requires education and quality questions. And so there's something in each of those areas on the website for
Okay.
education, some for sales, some for free. I would take advantage of any of them you can.
Fantastic. You got a unique spin on this. Honestly, that it's not. I'll just close with the listeners. Like I said, I looked at your material. There's a lot of motivational speakers out there, and I've heard you say, "I'm not a motivational speaker. I don't want to motivate people." You kind of motivate people to not rely on external motivations. If I can, speak for you there for a second. But yeah, it's interesting, and nobody could combat it, right? Everyone knows when they're doing something they love. They don't even, time flies. They don't even know what time it is. If you're doing something that's miserable, time slows down to a crawl. So there's obvious confirmation to everything you're saying here. So, well, Dr. Demartini, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much, and I wish you the best. And what tours, things like that, is that what your seminars? That's all on the website as well, I assume.
Yeah, if you go under events on my
Okay.
website, I'm teaching the Breakthrough Experience in London this weekend, online, the London Hours. Every week is something different. I'm doing my leadership program right after
Okay.
that, midweek. I do programs. If you go on the events calendar, it tells you at least some of them, not all the private ones, but at least the public ones.
Okay. Are you traveling more now as COVID's sort of getting over that COVID hump? Or
I've been doing mostly on Zoom. I'm back on the ship in
okay.
July because we've been not able to sail around the world.
Mm,
But I will be probably back in the last quarter. I'll probably be traveling much more again, but I would be
neat.
guessing that.
Cool. Okay. Excellent. Well, Dr. Demartini, thank you so much. Appreciate your time, and I really appreciate the conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you
All
for the
right.
great questions. And whoever's out there, give yourself permission to be the magnificent you. The magnificence of who you are is far greater than any fantasy you'll ever impose on
Mm,
yourself.
great closer. Thanks, sir. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
You too. Thank you.